Caleb didn't believe in fate until a tattered spiral-bound notebook fell into his lap on bus route 7. It was the first time in years he'd been on public transportation. The vinyl seat felt cold through his coat. The window beside him fogged with the kind of late autumn drizzle that blurred outlines and softened city edges. Ashton Falls wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis, but there was something anonymous and humbling about a city bus. No one looked at you long enough to recognize your sorrow. That was part of the appeal. He had told his driver to take the morning off, claiming errands. In truth, Caleb just wanted to disappear for an hour. Being Caleb Whitaker, son of legacy, was exhausting, especially now after the divorce. Especially with Jonah retreating further into himself with every passing week. The bus jerked to a stop, doors sighing open. A woman in a faded gray coat and scuffed tennis shoes hurried off clutching a brown paper bag. As she moved, something slipped from her tote and landed on the seat beside where she'd sat, a beat-up spiral notebook, the corners curled pages sticking out like wings. Caleb noticed it a second too late to call after her. He picked it up. It was soft, with use the kind of softness that came from months of being crammed into bags and opened with tired fingers. On the cover, a sticker had peeled halfway off. A small name was written in blocky, slightly shaky print, Naomi Ellis. He hesitated. Reading someone's private words felt invasive, but something a pull he couldn't quite name compelled him to flip it open. If anyone ever reads this, please know I did my best, even when no one saw me. The sentence was scrawled across the top of a page, underlined twice. He read it again, then again. The handwriting was small and neat, with occasional smudges. As he turned the pages, he saw dates, fragments of days, only slept 3 hours last night. Jonah didn't talk, but he drew me a picture. The rent is late again. I think my landlord's patience is wearing thin. I miss being touched, not sex, just held. Caleb's throat tightened. The voice in the diary was achingly raw, funny at times, often self-deprecating, always honest. She wrote about coffee she couldn't afford but bought anyway, because it made her feel like she had a morning. About skipping meals so her son could have a warm one. About smiling at work at the school even when she felt invisible. He paused on one entry. There's a little boy I look after sometimes in the nurse's room. He doesn't talk, just draws. But he sits closer to me than to anyone else. I call him Jay. He makes me want to try harder. His heart lurched. Jonah. He knew it in his gut. The pieces clicked slowly. Caleb had seen a new face listed on the weekly staff list for the school's nurse aide, a Naomi Ellis, part-time subcontracted. His ex-wife had mentioned a new aide briefly during one of their brief, tense co-parenting handoffs, dismissing her as some local girl from the east side. He kept reading. Jay drew me a picture of a cat today, then another of a house. He doesn't say much, but sometimes he hums when I hum. I think he feels safe when we sit together. Maybe he knows I don't expect him to be anything but himself. Caleb leaned back in the seat. His son hadn't spoken a full sentence in over a year. Not to therapists, not to his teachers, not even to him. But this Naomi, this stranger on the bus with the aching words and broken shoes, somehow made Jonah feel something. The bus rolled past Main and 6th, the diner Caleb remembered going to in high school, still clinging to life, its neon flickering like it always had. People moved in the rain, bundled in hoodies and big coats, faces turned downward. No one noticed the man in the dark peacoat clutching a stranger's diary like it held answers. Caleb stepped off the bus just past Lincoln Avenue, notebook tucked under his arm like something fragile. The air outside was thick with that metallic smell only wet sidewalks could produce. He zipped his coat, lowered his head, and walked the few blocks to his office, a modest building compared to the towering high-rises his name helped build, but perfect for keeping a low profile in a town like Ashton Falls. Inside the space was warm walls painted in honey tones, lined with sketches of redevelopment plans and community housing prototypes. It was part of his self-imposed penance, revitalizing the very town his father once overlooked. But today, blueprints meant nothing. He slid into the leather chair behind his desk, pulled the notebook open, and kept reading. There are moments when I feel like I'm unraveling, but then Jay walks in and just sits beside me, and it's like my pieces know where to fall again. He could picture her, Naomi, sitting in that small nurse's aid room, fluorescent lights buzzing above her, maybe still wearing her bakery apron, hair pulled back from a long shift, yet offering calm to a boy who said nothing. That same boy who'd drawn further into silence with each court date, each handoff between two people who couldn't agree on how to parent or even how to speak anymore. Another passage caught his eye. Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever really see me. Not the tired mom, not the mistake I made at 17. Just me, Naomi, who still loves poetry, who still sings to the radio even when I'm bone tired, who still believes on good days that kindness comes back around. He closed the book for a moment, pressed his palm against the cover. Her words felt like breath, warm, unnoticed, essential. He opened his laptop, pulled up the employee records from the school district. She was there, Naomi Ellis, hired in September, worked mornings at Ashton Middle School, afternoons at Marshall's Bakery. No complaints filed, average salary, no emergency contacts listed. His phone buzzed. A picture lit up on the screen, Jonah. A selfie sent from his mother's phone last weekend, the boy sitting cross-legged on the couch, sketchpad on his lap. His eyes distant, lips a straight line. Caleb's chest tightened. Jonah hadn't made eye contact with him in weeks. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He simply existed in silence as though afraid to take up too much space. But Naomi's diary, her Jay, was someone else. A boy who hummed, who drew cats, who sat close. He needed to know more, not just about her, about what she had done somehow, without trying, without knowing how she had reached into the fog surrounding Jonah and lit a lantern there. The page he turned to next held a drawing. A simple one, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. A tall figure, a smaller one with curly hair, and a woman with long braids. Above them, written in pencil, "Someday Family." He stared at it for a long time, then gently slid the notebook closed. He hesitated only a second before dialing his assistant. "Trina," he said quietly, "I need a name." She paused. "Go on." "Naomi Ellis. Find out who she is." Quietly. "Of course," she replied, no questions asked. "Anything in particular I should be looking for?" He glanced down at the worn cover in his hand. "Everything." As he ended the call, Caleb leaned back in his chair, the hum of the office fading behind the noise in his mind. He didn't know where this road would lead. But somehow, through a lost notebook on a rainy November morning, a woman he'd never met had already begun to change everything. Naomi adjusted the ice pack on Jonah's forehead with a gentleness that came only from exhaustion and habit. The nurse had stepped away to grab more Band-Aids, and for a moment, it was just the two of them in the small school health office, him quiet as always, and her still in her flour-dusted apron from the early shift at the bakery. Her back ached, her legs pulsed, but somehow, this room with its dull lighting and faint smell of disinfectant felt more peaceful than anywhere else in her world. Jonah didn't look at her, but he didn't pull away either. That was something. "You like dinosaurs, huh?" she asked softly, pointing at the tiny triceratops he'd drawn in the corner of his paper. No answer, not even a glance. Still she smiled. "You don't have to talk," she added, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Some people speak with their eyes, or their drawings." "I see you, Jay." Jonah blinked, his hand twitching toward his pencil, then stilled again. Naomi leaned back in her chair and stared at the rain streaking across the small window. It was her 5th day seeing Jonah in this room. Same time, same posture, same silence. Most teachers passed by him like a ghost. She couldn't. There was something about him, maybe the way he held things and the way his shoulders curled in, as if he'd made himself smaller for the world's convenience. She knew that feeling. Back at 17, when she'd found out she was pregnant, they'd all said the same things, her family, her classmates, even her pastor. "Girl, your life is over." You've ruined your chances. Don't expect a man to pick up your baggage. She'd believed it for a long time, still did on some days, but something inside her refused to stop hoping. She'd kept the baby, got her GED, took 2 jobs, found joy in small things, warm banana bread. Jonah's drawings the way the sun fell through the blinds in this tiny nurse's office. In her diary that morning she had written, "Maybe kindness is something we practice, not something we wait for." She didn't know who'd ever read those words, maybe no one, but writing them made her feel like she existed, like she was more than just tired. Across the room, Jonah reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He slid it slowly across the cot toward her. Naomi blinked, then carefully opened it. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a wonky sun. A tall one, a child and a woman with long braids. Above it scribbled in shaky handwriting, "Someday family." Her breath caught. She looked up. Jonah's eyes met hers for just a second before darting away. But that second was everything. A few hours later, Naomi stood alone at the bus stop waiting for Route 7 to take her home. Her hair was damp curls coiled against her cheeks. She clutched her notebook close to her chest, unaware that it was no longer in her bag. The drizzle turned to rain. Somewhere else in a quiet office a few blocks away, a man she had never met stared down at that very notebook, at her words, her hope, her drawing, and made a decision that would begin to bend the arc of both their lives. Jonah didn't speak, but when Naomi gave him crayons, he started telling stories. It began as shapes. Blue clouds, yellow boxes, red circles with uneven edges. He'd sit cross-legged on the cot tongue, poking out slightly in concentration, filling page after page in the spiral-bound sketch pad Naomi had slipped into her tote that morning just for him. She didn't ask questions, not at first. Instead, she'd sit nearby grading health forms or restocking bandages, humming faintly along to the soft jazz she kept playing from her phone's speaker. But always she'd glance up when Jonah drew. And when he turned the page to her quietly without speaking, she'd look at it like it was the most important message she'd received all day. "Rain," she said, pointing at one of his early sketches, a gray swirl of lines above a little stick figure with hunched shoulders. Sad. He didn't nod, but his eyes flickered toward the paper, then toward her, and back again. Another page, yellow sun large and off-center stick arms reaching upward. Happy she tried. This time he slid the page toward her without breaking eye contact. A silent yes. Naomi recalled something her mama used to say when her younger cousin wouldn't speak for the first few years. Sometimes kids speak with their hands before their mouths. She never knew how much truth was tucked in that old Southern wisdom until now. By the 3rd day, Jonah had drawn a dozen small scenes. Some were just colors. Others hinted at stories, a boat in stormy water, a woman holding an umbrella over a child, a tiny bird in a too big sky. Naomi began adding small prompts, a soft question here, a doodle of her own next to his. Never pressure, just presence. Then came the breakthrough. She drew a smiley face beside one of his sons. Beneath it, she sketched a smaller version with a frown. "See," she said gently. "Sometimes we feel different ways, but all feelings are okay." Jonah's pencil paused mid-air. Then he reached over, took her paper, and drew a third face, eyes closed, mouth, a tiny line. Underneath, he scribbled a single word in crooked block letters, "Safe." Naomi blinked. Her throat caught. "That's a beautiful feeling," she whispered. That afternoon, as the school bell rang and distant footsteps echoed in the hallways, Naomi watched Jonah linger in the doorway before heading out with his teacher. Just before leaving, he turned and offered her something close to a smile. It made her heart do something strange, like it had remembered how to lift. Later that evening, as the sun bled orange over Ashton Falls, Naomi stood behind the counter at Marshall's Bakery, her apron freshly powdered from a rush of flour-dusted pies. The place was nearly empty, save for an old couple nursing coffee in the back and a teenager scrolling through her phone by the display case. She boxed up 2 muffins, banana walnut, left over from the morning, and slipped one into her own bag before heading to the back for closing duties. Across the street, in a dark sedan parked under a crooked lamppost, Caleb watched from behind the wheel. He hadn't meant to follow her, but after reading another entry in the diary, Naomi's quiet heartbreak written in lowercase letters, her exhaustion hidden between lines like, "I don't need praise. I just need to know I'm not invisible." He couldn't stay away. He saw her hand the second muffin to a young boy sitting on the bakery steps, maybe 10 or 11. She didn't say much, just offered it with a tired but genuine smile before disappearing through the side door. The boy lit up as if someone had handed him gold. Caleb leaned back in his seat. He wasn't used to feeling this unsteady. Normally decisions came easily. Board meetings, court dates, custody evaluations, everything was calculated. But Naomi wasn't a calculation. And Jonah, his son, his sweet silent son, had smiled for her. Actually smiled. Caleb hadn't seen that since before the divorce, maybe longer. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, torn between instincts. Part of him wanted to step in, claim authority, protect his son from strangers. Another part, one he barely trusted, wanted to step back and watch the magic unfold. From the passenger seat, Trina's text buzzed. Naomi Ellis. No red flags, quiet life, working class background, no known relatives nearby. Caleb stared at the screen, then back toward the bakery. His heart ached with something that felt like longing, but also regret. The next day, Naomi returned to the nurse's office with a small bundle wrapped in parchment paper and a slightly soggy drawing pad tucked under her arm. Rain had started early and soaked through her tote on the way in, but Jonah didn't seem to mind. He was already there, seated quietly on the cot, cradling his knees like he always did. His hair curled damp against his temples, and his tiny socks were mismatched again blue, with rockets red with tiny sharks. Naomi didn't ask. She never did. Instead, she peeled back the parchment and handed him a muffin. "Still warm," she said. "Banana walnut again? No nuts this time, I remember." Jonah didn't take it right away. He just looked at it then, at her. Naomi offered a playful shrug. "It's not a bribe, just something soft on a rainy day." He took it slowly, hands small and careful. No thank you, no smile. But he didn't set it down either. Naomi settled into the chair beside him and pulled out a fresh box of crayons, one of those big 64-color packs with a built-in sharpener in the back. She placed them on the low table between them, like an offering. "Want to show me your favorite color today?" Jonah's fingers hovered. He picked dandelion yellow first, then added stormy gray, and finally a soft green she'd never seen used before. He turned to a new page and started sketching his lines, slower than yesterday, more deliberate. Naomi watched as a figure took shape, a girl, maybe herself, standing next to a small boy. Both had wings. One wing was bent. "Can I ask a question?" Naomi said after a minute, her voice soft, more like breath than speech. Jonah didn't look up, but his pencil paused permission. "Did you give us wings because we fly, or because we fall?" He paused again. Then with his other hand reached for the blue crayon and drew a cloud over the girl's head. Then sun rays pushing through it. Naomi's chest tightened. "So, we fall, but we don't stay down." No answer, just a faint nod. Or maybe she imagined it. As he drew, she pulled out her diary. Just a few minutes to scribble a thought before the next bell rang. "I don't want anything from him, just let me keep caring. That's all I ask." She didn't write Jonah's name, never did. In case someone ever found it. In case her words made it into the wrong hands. Still, she always signed those entries the same way, Love N. Not Love Mom, not Love Nurse, just N. Across the school parking lot, Caleb sat in his car again, third day in a row. He hadn't planned to return, but something kept drawing him back. He kept telling himself he just needed to observe to understand why Jonah's behavior had shifted so suddenly. But it wasn't just Jonah. It was her. He watched through the windshield as Naomi handed Jonah a crayon, then rested her chin on her palm, patient, listening to nothing and everything all at once. There was a stillness about her, one that reminded Caleb of old jazz records and childhood Sundays. No rush, no performance, just presence. And Jonah, he was drawing, not fidgeting, not staring out the window in blank silence. Drawing. Caleb's throat tightened. From the passenger seat, he picked up the folder Trina had left for him. A thin file, only 3 pages. Naomi's work history. No criminal record, no certifications beyond CPR. Working 2 jobs, both part-time. Lived in a duplex on Harlow Street near the old train tracks. No college, no spouse, no parents listed. She was practically invisible on paper, but Caleb couldn't stop seeing her. She laughed at something Jonah did, a small sound, quick and rich, and even from this distance he could feel how real it was. No pretense, just joy, raw and fleeting. Vivian would never understand this. She'd already started pushing for changes at the school. Said Naomi lacked the training to handle complex cases. Said someone with credentials should be dealing with their son. Caleb had agreed, until now, because credentials hadn't made Jonah smile. A moment later, Caleb saw Naomi pack up the crayons, brushing a loose braid behind her ear. She handed Jonah a napkin, tapped her heart gently with 2 fingers, a gesture he returned. Caleb's chest ached. He opened the glove compartment, pulled out a note card, and scribbled down a single sentence. For the nurse's fund, discreetly, keep her on staff. Then he slid in a check. As the sky dimmed to a dusky lavender, Naomi closed up the nurse's station. Jonah had gone home hours ago, but his quiet presence still lingered like warmth in a sweater just taken off. She gathered his drawings from the cot, handling each one like a page from scripture, folding them gently into a manila folder, labeled only with a simple heart. She thought about showing them to someone, maybe the teacher, maybe the principal, but some part of her wanted to keep them tucked away, like a secret between her and a little boy who didn't speak, but somehow saw her. That night at the bakery, Naomi moved more slowly than usual. Her feet ached from standing 12 hours between both jobs, and her shoulders carried the weight of judgment. A woman from the PTA had come in earlier, ordering 4 dozen scones, then leaning in close with a sugar-slicked smile to say, "You know, Naomi, the school really should hire someone with formal training. I mean, what if something real happened?" Naomi had smiled back, lips tight, and boxed the scones in silence. What if something real happened? As if children's pain only counted when it came with fevers or fractures. She stayed past closing cleaning counters that didn't need cleaning just to avoid the quiet of her apartment. Across town, in a modest but warm living room, Caleb sat on the floor beside Jonah. No toys, just crayons. He offered the box to his son and waited. Jonah picked brick red, drew a small square, then a stick figure, then a larger one. Caleb's breath caught. He pointed. "Is that you?" Jonah didn't answer, but his hand moved again. He drew a figure with long hair, then wings, just like Naomi's drawing. Caleb swallowed hard. "Is she safe?" Jonah's pencil stopped, then very slowly he nodded. For the first time in months, the knot in Caleb's chest loosened. The next morning, Naomi arrived early to the nurse's office. The custodian had left the light on by mistake, and a fresh bouquet of wildflowers sat in a paper cup on her desk. No note, just a folded envelope beside it. She opened it cautiously. Inside, a donation receipt to the school's nurse fund. $5,000, anonymous donor. Her eyes blurred. She wasn't naive, she knew what this meant. Someone saw her, maybe even believed in her. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Enough to buy supplies, maybe even a heater for the drafty back corner where Jonah liked to nap. Later that day, she caught sight of him through the hallway window. He was holding a muffin in one hand, crayons in the other, walking beside a volunteer aide. When he saw Naomi at the door, he paused, just for a second, then lifted the muffin toward her like a tiny toast. Naomi laughed, pressing a hand to her heart. That evening, she returned to her diary. "Jonah drew me today, with wings, safe. I think he feels it now, the safety. Maybe not with everyone, but with me. That's enough for now." She set the pen down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of her fridge and the tap of rain against her kitchen window. The town still whispered. The mothers still judged. But something had shifted inside her. She didn't feel invisible anymore. Meanwhile, in his office downtown, Caleb sat across from the head of the school board. "You're sure about this?" the man asked. "You want her to stay on despite the pushback." Caleb leaned forward. "I've reviewed the situation. She's doing more than most certified professionals ever did." "But what about your ex-wife's concerns?" "I'll handle Vivian." The man frowned. "Then I'll process the donation under the foundation." Quietly. "Good," Caleb said, already rising. "I want no fanfare, just results." He left the building with something simmering beneath his skin. Not quite clarity, not quite guilt, but something close to purpose. That night, before turning in, he found himself opening the diary again. He flipped through pages until he landed on one smeared with the faint imprint of a teardrop. The words were shaky but honest. "I know I'm not much. I'm tired, broke, sometimes ashamed of how little I have to offer. But I won't stop showing up for him, because he matters." He closed the book gently. Caleb walked to Jonah's room. The boy was already asleep, curled around a stuffed lion. On the dresser sat the newest drawing, 3 stick figures, holding hands beneath a sun. He smiled, and in that moment he knew what he had to do. Caleb wrote an anonymous donation to the school nurse fund, but requested that Naomi be kept on staff. The town didn't need facts to judge Naomi, just a whisper in the wrong ear. It came quietly like rain that taps against the window before anyone thinks to close it. Naomi sat on the edge of the nurse's cot, folding fresh towels, when the intercom crackled and summoned her to the main office. She didn't expect the tight-lipped glance from the secretary, nor the principal's cautious tone when he offered her a seat. "There's been a report, Naomi." He began, sliding a crisp envelope across the desk. "An anonymous concern about your certification. Your relationship with Jonah was mentioned specifically." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Official letterhead. Passive language. Unclear boundaries exceeds volunteer expectations pending internal review. She looked up slowly. "Is this real?" He sighed, avoiding her eyes. "We're placing you on temporary leave while we sort things out. It's protocol." "But She stopped. The words shrank in her throat. She could feel them, all the voices behind the walls, the mothers in pastel cardigans, the ones who never learned her name, but always noticed her skin, her hair, her lack of a wedding ring. She imagined them saying, "She's sweet, but no ring on that finger. What does that say?" Naomi left without raising her voice. At home, she sat cross-legged on her old couch, the envelope beside her like a silent accusation. The TV hummed in the background, but she couldn't follow the news. Her journal lay open on the coffee table, her own handwriting staring back at her. "I've been invisible so long, I forgot what it feels like to be seen." She closed it gently, then closed her eyes. Elsewhere, at a law office lined with degrees and glass, Vivian Whitaker sipped her coffee slowly. Her assistant hovered nearby. "You asked me to file that complaint." Vivian nodded. Discreetly. "Don't tie it back to me. She's unqualified and too close to my son." "Of course. But if Jonah responds well to her, is it really a bad thing?" Vivian's eyes narrowed. "What's bad is letting people like that think they're irreplaceable. She's a temporary comfort, not a solution." At the same time, in a different corner of town, Caleb stared through his office window phone pressed to his ear. "Wait, what do you mean she was placed on leave?" he asked. The school administrator sounded hesitant. "We received a complaint. We're reviewing it." "Did this come from my ex-wife?" "I can't confirm that." Caleb swore under his breath. "Jonah needs stability, not more loss. You're removing the only person he connects with." The line crackled. "It's temporary." But Caleb knew his ex-wife. Temporary was just her way of easing into permanent. Back at the school, Jonah sat silently in the corner of the nurse's office, which now smelled too much like bleach and not enough like Naomi's vanilla lotion. He didn't draw that day. He didn't even hold the crayons. Instead, he pressed his back against the wall, eyes blank, feet rocking slowly. Miss Addie watched from the hallway, wiping flour from her apron. Her chest ached. She found Naomi sitting outside the bakery later that evening, hoodie pulled up, staring at nothing. "I figured you'd be out here," Miss Addie said, holding out a styrofoam cup. "Hot apple cider, extra cinnamon." Naomi took it with both hands, but didn't sip. "Let me guess." Addie continued, settling beside her. "Someone finally decided you were too visible." Naomi gave a breath of a laugh. "That obvious, huh? They don't need reasons, honey. Just a story to pass around church or whisper during bake sales." Naomi stared at the steam rising from the cider. "I'm not going to fight it. I won't beg to do what's right." Addie tilted her head. "You sure that's not just fear talking?" "I'm sure I'm tired," Naomi said softly. "I've fought so long just to stand still. I can't chase their approval, too." A beat passed. Miss Addie reached into her apron and pulled out a folded note. This came in with the morning orders. From one of the parents. Naomi unfolded it. "You help my child feel safe. That matters more than a degree. Thank you." Her hands shook. She tucked the note into her jacket next to her heart. Jonah sat cross-legged in his bedroom, crayons untouched beside him, a blank sheet of paper staring up like a question he couldn't answer. The walls of his room were soft blue, lined with dinosaurs and alphabet posters, but none of it reached him. Not today. He kept looking at the door, waiting. When it didn't open by lunchtime, he finally dragged the paper closer. His small hands hesitated over the orange crayon before choosing black instead. First he drew a square, then another inside it. Thick lines pressed hard. A box. Inside he drew himself stick arms wrapped around his knees, eyes wide and hollow. He paused, looked up at the door again. Then he picked up a red crayon, and outside the box began drawing jagged, uneven strokes. Flames. Downstairs, Caleb watched the baby monitor, not for safety, but for signs. He had once installed it out of anxiety, but now he found himself needing it to understand his son's silence. And silence had never been louder. He turned away, jaw clenched. Later that evening, he stood across the street from Naomi's apartment. A cold drizzle dusted his coat, but he didn't care. The soft yellow light from her window leaked onto the sidewalk like a secret. She was there, curled up on the couch, notebook open on her lap, head leaning back in thought. He didn't knock. Not yet. He just stood and watched the way he had done at the school parking lot 2 days before. Watched the way she tied her hair up with one hand while flipping a page with the other. The way she blinked slowly, as if carrying more fatigue than her body could hold. The way she stared at the ceiling like she was searching for an answer in the drywall. She looked nothing like the women in his world, always polished, always poised for advantage. She looked real. Inside, Naomi felt the ache behind her ribs start to hum again. She traced the spine of her notebook absently, then began to write. "I don't want anything from him. Just let me keep caring. That's all I'm asking." Her pen stalled. She exhaled, wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her sweatshirt, and kept writing. "I never had the words to tell people what I see in Jonah. But I see a boy who listens to shadows, who remembers kindness even when no one gives it." A knock came. Not on her door, in her heart. A flutter she couldn't name. Outside, Caleb took a step closer to her door, then stopped. He held the diary against his chest, unsure of what it meant, that he had read so much of it over and over. Was it wrong? Was it fate? He remembered the drawing again, the 3 stick figures holding hands labeled "Someday Family," and suddenly felt like an intruder in a hope that wasn't his. Still, something inside him whispered, "You owe her honesty." At least that. Back in Jonah's room, the boy finally dropped the red crayon. He walked to the dresser, climbed onto the chair, and pulled down the small stack of drawings Naomi had helped him make. Happy sun, sad rain, stick figure Naomi with wings, one labeled safe. He clutched that one tight and whispered, not with his mouth, but with the rhythm of his breath, her name. It was nearly 9 p.m. when Naomi opened the door to the quiet knock. She hadn't been expecting anyone, not after this kind of day. Her hoodie hung loose on her shoulders, and her bare feet padded across the wooden floor with caution. Through the peephole, she saw nothing but a dark silhouette, backlit by the glow of the hallway light. She opened it halfway and froze. Caleb Whitaker stood there, soaked from the drizzle, holding something to his chest like it was made of glass. For a second, Naomi didn't recognize him. Not in this light, not without the coldness he usually wore when he visited the school on official matters. Here under the broken porch bulb and the soft breath of rain, he looked unsure. Younger somehow. Tired in a way that mirrored her own. Her eyes dropped to the object in his hand. Her diary. She blinked, throat dry. "Where did you get that?" He hesitated, then held it out, both hands open. "You left it. On the bus. Route 7. Her breath caught. "You read it." "I did." Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Naomi stepped back. "You shouldn't have." "I know." But he didn't look away. His eyes, usually cool and unreadable, now flickered with something raw shame, maybe. Or something closer to reverence. "I tried not to," he said quietly. "But your words, they pulled me in. Not just what you wrote about Jonah, but what you wrote about yourself." Naomi crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly aware of every flaw: the frizz in her hair, the chipped paint on the doorframe, the sag in the couch behind her. "I didn't write it for anyone to read." "I know," he repeated, "but I'm not here as Jonah's father or some donor. I came because I needed to meet the woman who saw my son before I did." She didn't move, didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. Behind her, Jonah's safe drawing still lay on the coffee table. Caleb's gaze fell on it, softening. "You're the only one he's ever drawn with wings," he said. "Did you know that?" Naomi blinked, her throat aching. "I didn't do anything special. I just listened. That's what made it special." Rain whispered along the porch awning. Somewhere in the distance, a siren groaned softly, fading into the southern dark. Caleb looked down at the diary once more, thumb resting on the worn cover. "I read something in there. A line you wrote that stuck with me." Naomi swallowed. He met her eyes. "I've been invisible so long, I forgot what it feels like to be seen." She exhaled slowly, barely a breath. "That was just late night scribbling." "No," he said gently. "It was truth. And I saw you, Naomi. I still do." Her eyes shimmered, but she looked away. She wasn't used to being seen without armor. "I don't want anything from you," she whispered. "I'm not here to take," Caleb replied. "Only to give back what's yours." He extended the diary again. This time she took it. Their fingers brushed warm, tentative, real. Naomi pulled it close and stepped halfway behind the door. "Good night, Mr. Whitaker." Caleb didn't flinch at the formality. He gave a small nod, then turned. But just as he reached the stairs, Naomi's voice called softly through the door frame. "You still think the drawing means what it says? Someday." "Family." Caleb stopped. The muscles in his back tightened under his coat. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I hope someday still exists." Then he walked away. Inside, Naomi clutched the journal against her chest. On the last page, she hadn't remembered writing it, but there it was in her own looping cursive. "If anyone ever reads this, please remember, I only ever wanted to matter." She closed it gently, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Meanwhile, down the street, Caleb pulled out his phone and typed a message to his assistant. "Find out who Naomi Ellis is." Quietly. He hit send. Naomi never expected to walk into the hospital and see her name on a room plaque. It was early, the kind of late autumn morning where the sun never really showed up, just a gray haze floating over Ashton Falls like a wet blanket. Miss Addie had insisted she come, saying there was someone she needed to meet, but wouldn't elaborate. Naomi had argued, saying she had laundry to do and lesson plans to review for her tentative return to school, but Addie had simply smiled that knowing smile and handed her a coat. Now, standing in the children's wing of Ashton Falls Community Hospital, Naomi froze. Mounted just outside a newly painted therapy room was a brushed bronze plaque. In simple lettering it read, "The Ellis Room, for those who see the quiet ones." Her knees buckled slightly. What is this?" Miss Addie stood beside her, hands clasped gently, her voice low and proud. "Someone made a donation." Quietly. said it was in honor of someone who doesn't look away from the overlooked. Naomi felt her heartbeat thud behind her eyes. She stepped closer, fingertips grazing the edge of the plaque. The room inside was small but warm, soft lighting, plush rugs, beanbags in bright colors, shelves with crayons and drawing pads, a reading corner filled with books about feelings, about courage, about being different. "This can't be for me," Naomi whispered. Miss Addie didn't speak for a long while. Then sometimes the right eyes notice you when you least expect it. Naomi turned her throat thick. "I don't deserve this." "Yes," Addie said softly. "You do." Tears welled hot and unrelenting. Naomi stepped into the room, running her fingers across the child-sized furniture, the mural on the wall of a tree with branches shaped like arms reaching down. In a way, it reminded her of Jonah's drawings, how they always included shelter, someone watching over from above. She sat down slowly in one of the beanbags and let herself cry. Not the silent kind, but the kind that comes from being seen after years of invisibility. Miss Addie sat beside her and didn't say a word. Later that day, Naomi stood outside the school, the air brisk, and the clouds still undecided about rain. Principal Diaz had called her in this time not for reprimand, but with an offer. "We can't put you back full-time just yet," he said, shifting awkwardly in his chair, "but the board agreed to a part-time role. Just afternoons for now." Naomi had blinked, stunned. "That's more than I expected." He'd nodded. "Some people in the community spoke up for you." She hadn't asked who. Somehow she knew better than to dig. Jonah was quieter than usual when she returned. He sat cross-legged near the bookshelf, sketching slowly. Naomi didn't interrupt, just sat nearby and waited. After a few minutes, he slid his pad toward her. 2 rooms, one filled with yellow light and stick figures, her hymns, someone else not fully drawn. Another room empty, the sky outside the window gray and raining. "Which one do you like better?" she asked, tracing the edge of the paper. He didn't answer, but his little finger tapped gently on the one with her in it. And then, just for a moment, he smiled. That night, Naomi stood over her tiny stovetop, stirring a pot of tomato soup with a thrift store wooden spoon that had long since lost its shine. Jonah was humming softly as he scribbled in another notebook at the kitchen table. It was a sound so gentle she almost missed it at first. But when she realized, she froze mid-stir. She didn't turn, didn't want to spook the moment. He was drawing again. Since she'd returned to school part-time, things had shifted. She wasn't sure if it was just routine that calmed Jonah or something deeper. But he'd started to respond, not with words, not yet, but with tiny signs of peace. A smile, a nod, a hum. Naomi couldn't remember the last time someone made her feel like her presence brought comfort. And yet, here was this little boy, this silent, sweet soul, showing her more trust than most adults had offered in years. After dinner, she tucked Jonah into the worn-out couch cushions and pulled his blanket up under his chin. He looked up at her and tapped her hand twice before closing his eyes. It was a goodbye, or maybe a thank you. She returned to the kitchen, reached for her journal, and opened to a fresh page. Her handwriting was smaller now, more cramped, like she was trying to say more with less. "I don't know who saw me, but someone did, and I'm not used to that." She paused. Maybe that room wasn't just a thank you. Maybe it was a way of saying you mattered, even when no one clapped. The pen lingered above the paper, hovering like a thought not ready to land. She closed the diary softly and stared out the window. The clouds had cleared, revealing a brittle, pale moon. Somewhere out there, someone had decided she was worth noticing, and she didn't even know his name. Across town, Caleb sat in his home office, elbows on the desk, eyes fixed on the journal in front of him. Not Naomi's diary, but his own. Or rather, the blank one he had bought after rereading hers for the 20th time. He opened the first page, wrote, "I watched her today at the diner. She gave her last $5 to a stranger and smiled like she just won something. I don't think she even noticed I was there." He paused, looked at the soft light flickering from his fireplace. "She doesn't take tips. She pays for other people's coffees. She talks to the man with dementia like he still remembers things. And Jonah watches her like she's safe ground. He leaned back, chewing on the inside of his cheek. I should tell her, but I don't want to ruin the version of me she's built in her mind. Maybe it's better she never knows? Maybe she's already given Jonah more than I ever could. He closed the notebook but didn't put it away. Instead, he picked up her old diary restored, pressed with a new soft leather cover. He'd rebound it himself, staying up 3 nights to make sure every torn page was realigned. At first it had been guilt, but now it felt like reverence. He'd underlined her line from weeks ago. I did my best even when no one saw me, Caleb whispered aloud. I saw you. He wasn't sure if that counted. At the bakery the next morning, Miss Addie noticed Naomi looked different. Not in appearance exactly, but something in the way she carried her tray of scones. Lighter almost. You dreaming with your eyes open again, baby? Addie teased, sliding a tray into the oven. Naomi gave a bashful shrug. It's nice, being part of something again. Addie paused, then handed Naomi a mug of tea without a word. Outside the cold nipped at the windows, but inside it was warm, soft music, flour-dusted counters, and a woman learning what it meant to feel visible. Later that afternoon, Naomi walked slowly down the school hallway, the kind of slow, where you weren't late, but wanted to stretch out every second that still felt like yours. Principal Diaz had approved her return on a limited basis, mornings only, no medical treatments, just administrative support in the nurse's room. She took that as a gift. She passed the art bulletin board and paused. Jonah's newest drawing was pinned up in the corner. This time, it wasn't abstract. It was clear, almost careful, a small house, a sun, and a stick-figure woman kneeling beside a smaller figure. He'd drawn her again, and she was smiling. Naomi turned away, hand lightly brushing the paper as she walked on. The nurse's office still smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon balm. She breathed in the familiarity, then knelt to organize the shelf of spare clothes for kids who spilled juice or had accidents. As she folded a pair of sweatpants, she felt a shift in the room's air, like it had grown warmer. She turned. Jonah stood at the doorway holding a picture in both hands. He didn't walk in, just looked at her. She gave a small smile. Hey, buddy, that for me. He stepped forward, his eyes wide, and nodded once. She took the picture gently. This one was different. 2 rooms, one filled with color, a bookshelf, a bed, and the word Naomi drawn in crayon above it. The other room was empty, all white. The only thing inside, a tiny chair facing a wall. Naomi knelt. You drew this for me, she asked. Jonah's eyes met hers, and then soft, unsure, but real, he opened his mouth and whispered, home. It was barely more than breath. But Naomi froze. Her heart kicked into her ribs. She blinked hard, not sure if she'd imagined it. Jonah stepped closer and repeated, this time with the faintest conviction, home. Naomi dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him, with the gentleness of someone afraid to break a miracle. He didn't pull away. He let her hold him, and for a long moment, she just breathed, her eyes closed, lips trembling. It was the first time anyone had called her that. Not nurse, not mommy, not Naomi, home. Caleb never heard Jonah say it, but he saw the moment. From across the street, parked in his car, he watched through the narrow nurse's office window. It was unplanned. He'd only stopped by the school to check if the principal had received the donation request properly. But fate, it seemed, had better timing. He saw Naomi drop to her knees, arms wrapping around his son like the world depended on it. And Jonah didn't resist. Jonah leaned in. Caleb's throat tightened. It wasn't jealousy. It was awe. He leaned back in the seat and let out a slow breath. For once, he didn't feel the urge to rush into fix or control. Some healing had to happen in silence. He reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the carefully rebound diary. He'd kept it for too long. It was time. That evening, Naomi returned home, her heart still full. She unlocked her door, kicked off her shoes, and was halfway to setting her keys on the counter when she saw it. There on the doormat was her diary, clean, restored, smelling faintly of cedar and pressed leather. She bent down, hands trembling. On the front cover was a yellow sticky note. 6 words. No name. Thank you for loving him when I didn't know how. Her breath hitched. She clutched the diary to her chest. The street outside was quiet. No one standing nearby. No footsteps retreating down the stairs. Whoever had returned it had done so quietly, deliberately. She stepped inside, closed the door gently behind her, and leaned against it. Something had changed. She didn't know how. She didn't even know who. But someone had seen her, not as a mistake, not as a charity case, as a woman who mattered. And suddenly the world didn't feel so heavy. She thought the boy was just her patient. He thought the woman was just his son's caretaker. They were both wrong in the best way. The SUV pulled up to a long winding driveway flanked by dogwoods and quiet stone lamps. Naomi sat stiffly in the back seat, hands gripping her tote bag, like it could shield her from whatever came next. The driver had introduced himself with a calm voice and a formal nod. Ms. Ellis, I've been asked to escort you to the Whitaker Family Foundation. Mr. Whitaker will meet you inside. That name again. Whitaker. It had echoed in the town for years. Charity galas, library wings, the marble sign at Ashton Falls' only private hospital. But Naomi hadn't connected it. Not until now. And even now she tried not to leap to conclusions. The gates creaked open. The house no mansion appeared like a vision from a life that was never hers. Cream-colored stone ivy curling over the edges, lights glowing warm behind floor-to-ceiling windows. It was beautiful, but it made her stomach knot. This wasn't a foundation office. This was a home. The front door opened before she even knocked. And there in the threshold stood Caleb. No disguise now. Gone was the soft hoodie, the unshaven jaw, the man trying to disappear into a city bus seat. This Caleb wore a tailored navy sweater and slate trousers. Still simple, but it couldn't hide the posture of someone used to power. Someone born into it. Naomi froze. Her mouth went dry. You lied to me, she said flatly before he could speak. Caleb didn't flinch. I didn't tell you everything. That's true. But I never lied about how much I cared. Naomi stepped in carefully, like the floor might crack beneath her. The foyer smelled like citrus and clean linen. A fireplace flickered down the hall. Everything was beautiful, curated quiet, and it felt like a museum of a life she didn't belong in. You said this was a foundation meeting, she said, her voice sharp. It is, Caleb replied. It's the beginning of something I hope to build. But I wanted you to see where I come from. What I've been hiding. Naomi's laugh was soft and bitter. Oh, you've been hiding in a mansion. Must be so hard. Caleb didn't argue. He motioned toward a side room. Please, just sit with me. I'll explain. She didn't sit, but she followed. The room was a study leather chairs, built-in shelves, a photo of Jonah framed on the side table. Not a baby photo, a recent one. Jonah at school with Naomi in the background, blurry but smiling. Her breath caught. How long have you been watching me? Caleb's jaw clenched. Since the day you left that diary. Not like a stalker, I swear. I was just trying to understand. Naomi turned to him, eyes blazing now. Understand what? That I work 2 jobs and still can't pay for shoes that fit my kid. That your son trusts me more than his own father. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Caleb took them, absorbed them, then said quietly, yes. And I hated that it was true. But it is. You made him feel safe. You gave him color again. And I didn't even know how broken he was until I saw how whole he was with you. Naomi blinked fast and hard. No, she whispered. You don't get to spin this like a romance. You had money lawyers' access. I had day-old muffins and a kid who smiled once a week. Caleb stepped closer, but not too close. I know. That's why I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm offering something else. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside, Naomi saw a proposal signed, already funded. It was a plan for a children's therapy center. The name on top made her knees go weak. The Ellis Center for Quiet Healing. She stared. You used my name, she breathed. You earned it, he said. Naomi stared at him for a long time, eyes wide with a swirl of grief, anger, disbelief. And then, without a word, she turned and walked out of the room. Naomi walked fast, barely feeling the wind that whipped against her coat. She didn't look back, not once. Her shoes clicked sharply against the stone pathway, as if trying to keep up with the rush of emotion inside her. He had watched her struggle. He had seen Jonah's quiet, gentle unraveling, and yet he said nothing. A silver car waited at the gate, but she waved the driver off. "I'll walk." The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she welcomed it. It was something real, something she could feel, something that didn't lie. By the time she reached her apartment, dusk was pulling shadows across the pavement. Her feet ached, her head throbbed, but she wasn't ready to sit still. Not yet. Inside, Jonah was curled up on the rug crayons spread out in a halo around him. He looked up as she entered, a flicker of question in his dark eyes. She knelt beside him, brushing a hand across his hair. "I'm here, baby." He studied her face for a long time, longer than usual, and then slowly picked up the yellow crayon. He didn't draw right away. Instead, he pressed it into her hand. Then his tiny voice, a whisper, barely more than breath, spoke. "You're my real safe." Naomi froze. Her mouth parted, but no sound came out, not even a gasp. She hadn't heard Jonah speak a full sentence in ever. And now, not only had he spoken, he had named something. Named her. Claimed her. Tears pooled instantly, hot and blinding. She didn't care that her coat was still damp, that her cheeks were stained with exhaustion. She pulled him into her arms, clutching him tight against her chest. "I'm your safe," she murmured into his hair. "Always." For a long time, they just sat like that, quiet and unmoving, a fortress of arms and forgiveness. Later that night, Miss Addie arrived unannounced with a pie she claimed was accidentally overbaked, a lie they both let slide. "You okay, baby?" the older woman asked, handing Naomi a mug of warm milk. Naomi nodded, then shook her head. "I don't know. He told me the truth tonight. Everything." And still, it felt like too little too late. Miss Addie sank into the worn armchair, her eyes soft. "Sometimes the truth's not meant to fix what broke. It's meant to show you who's still trying to build." Naomi clutched the mug tighter. "I don't want to forgive him just because Jonah needs him. That wouldn't be real." "No," Miss Addie agreed. "But if Jonah is finding his voice because of what you gave him, maybe, just maybe Caleb's trying to find his too." Outside, the city hummed in distant pockets. Inside, Naomi sat in the stillness, wondering what it meant when silence wasn't empty anymore, but full of choices waiting to be made. Naomi couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, but the room was too quiet. Even Jonah's soft breathing from the next room didn't calm the ache circling her thoughts. She sat at the small kitchen table, the lamplight casting soft shadows across the chipped wood. In front of her sat a notebook, not hers but his. It had come tucked in a manila envelope earlier that evening, dropped quietly at her doorstep. No return address, no note, just the familiar slant of Caleb's handwriting across the cover. "For when you're ready." Naomi hesitated, fingers trembling, as she opened the first page. She hadn't expected much, maybe some rehearsed explanation, or another offer dipped in guilt. But it wasn't that. It was raw, uneven, honest. "I didn't fall for a nurse. I fell for the woman who taught my son to feel. You saw him when I didn't know how. You stayed when I didn't deserve your patience. You gave more than care. You gave him back to me. And I'm terrified you'll never let me say thank you out loud." Naomi's breath caught. The words didn't try to convince or charm. They didn't hide behind grandeur or money. They just were like a man finally speaking in his truest voice. She closed the notebook gently, pressing her palm against the cover as if to quiet the storm inside her chest. For once, her own words weren't rushing forward. Only one thing kept repeating in her mind. "He didn't write to impress me. He wrote to let me decide." The next morning, the bakery bell chimed softly as Naomi pushed open the glass door. The smell of cinnamon and butter wrapped around her like a familiar shawl. Miss Addie glanced up from behind the counter, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "You're up early," she said, but her eyes twinkled like she already knew. Naomi didn't smile. Not yet. but she stepped forward with purpose, brushing her hands against her coat as she walked to the register. Behind her, a few regulars chatted quietly over coffee. A toddler squealed near the window. Outside, the town of Ashton Falls slowly stirred to life. "I'm not saying yes," Naomi said softly, voice steady but gentle. Miss Addie blinked. Naomi looked her in the eye. To him, to the offer, to all of it. A pause. Then she added, "But I'm not walking away either. Hook." The quietest place in the hospital had never been filled with so much joy. The quietest place in the hospital had never been filled with so much joy. Sunlight streamed gently through the tall windows of the Ellis room, casting golden stripes across the freshly polished floor and the set of tiny chairs arranged in a circle. Naomi stood at the doorway for a long second, her hand resting just above the new nameplate on the wall, Ellis Room. For those who see the quiet ones. She didn't know who had written that inscription. Maybe it didn't matter. The words were already stitched into her heart. Inside, laughter flickered soft, tentative, real. 3 children, each holding a plush toy and a coloring book, sat with their legs crossed occasionally, glancing toward the woman who had become a safe space for them. Jonah stood near the whiteboard with a marker, drawing a bright orange sun above the outline of what looked like a house. It had crooked walls and a smiley face. "That one's me," he said clearly, pointing to the stick figure in front of the door. Naomi's chest rose with quiet awe. His voice still surprised her, gentle, unsure, but present. More present than it had ever been. "You remembered the windows," she said softly, kneeling beside him. Jonah nodded. "Because you said light makes rooms feel like they're listening." Across the room, Caleb leaned against the far wall, out of the way, his sleeves rolled up, as he helped restack some storybooks. He wasn't wearing his usual air of quiet guilt or reserve today. Something had shifted. He looked content just being in the background, letting the moment belong to Naomi and the children. A nurse stepped in to drop off a tray of apple slices and juice boxes. She smiled warmly at Naomi, not with pity, but with recognition. "You've got a full room today." Naomi chuckled. "Seems like the quiet ones are louder than we thought." She took her place on the floor, right in the middle of the circle. The kids settled around her instinctively, as if pulled by some unseen current. There were no formal speeches, no grand introductions, just crayons, cushions, and the kind of safety you can't buy or fake. "I thought we could do something different today," she said, holding up a stack of blank postcards. "We're going to write or draw thank you cards to anyone who made you feel seen." There was a beat of hesitation. Then Jonah reached out and took the first card. He bent over it, quietly sketching with the same seriousness some adults use to write legal briefs. Naomi watched him for a few moments before turning her gaze back to the group. Most of the children were too young to write sentences, but they scribbled rainbows, hearts, and smiling faces with focused intent. One little girl drew a tree with her name carved into the trunk. 10 minutes passed like petals falling. Jonah cleared his throat and stood walking to the front of the circle. He held out his card to Naomi, face down. "Can I read it?" he asked. Naomi blinked. "Of course." He turned the card over. It had no drawing, just 4 small words written in uneven block letters. "Thank you for hearing." Naomi felt the world tilt slightly. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. She wasn't sure when she'd started crying, but the tears felt right. Not heavy or sharp, just full. She reached out and pulled Jonah into her arms, and he let her. No flinching, no folding into himself. He leaned into her warmth, like it had always been his home. Behind them, Caleb watched quietly, his hand pressing lightly against the doorframe. It was Thanksgiving Day, but there were no turkeys or fancy tablecloths in this room. Just small hands, fragile healing, and gratitude spoken without fanfare. Miss Addie arrived later, carrying a pie wrapped in a gingham cloth and tied with string. "Brought this for after," she whispered to Naomi, slipping it onto the side table. "You've changed more than a boy today, sweetheart. You've changed a town." Naomi smiled, though her eyes were still wet. "I don't know if I did all that." Miss Addie tilted her head. Don't argue with an old woman carrying pie. They shared a quiet laugh, and Naomi rested her hand over the edge of the pie tin. Apple and cinnamon. Of course. Later, as the group session came to a close, and the children slowly filtered out with their parents, Naomi remained kneeling on the floor. Jonah had crawled into her lap asleep now, fingers loosely gripping the hem of her cardigan. She felt more stillness than she had in years, but it wasn't hollow anymore. Caleb approached with something folded in his hand. No envelopes, no signatures, just a piece of thick cream-colored paper. I thought about giving you this weeks ago, he said, quietly kneeling beside her, but I didn't earn that right until now. She accepted it, wordlessly, eyes flicking over the lines in Caleb's sharp, almost slanted handwriting. It wasn't long, but it held more weight than any speech he could have made. You're not just the voice my son found. You're the place he trusted first, and the reason I ever learned what love could look like when it asks for nothing in return. Caleb. Naomi didn't respond. Not yet. She just let the silence fill the room again, this time with warmth. The air outside was crisp with early winter. Naomi stepped out of the hospital with Jonah still curled up on her hip, his cheek resting against her shoulder. The sky was overcast, but the kind of soft gray that made everything feel wrapped in cotton. From behind her, the laughter of the last two children still lingered down the corridor like echoes of a promise kept. She crossed the parking lot slowly. The usual glances from townsfolk, so often sharp, skeptical, dismissive, now landed softer. Not warm exactly, but curious. Open even. A mother in scrubs held the hand of a little boy and nodded once at Naomi as they passed. Thank you, the woman said, just above a whisper. You helped my son. He draws now. About dreams. Naomi didn't know how to answer, so she smiled. A real one. The kind that didn't need translation. Behind her, Caleb exited quietly. No spotlight, no need for acknowledgement. He simply walked a few steps behind, watching Jonah stretch in her arms, rub his eyes, and blink up at her like she was the only thing that made sense. Caleb paused near the edge of the sidewalk, hands tucked into his pockets. Naomi turned slightly. You did all this, she said gently, but you never put your name on it. He shrugged. Some things speak louder when they're quiet. Naomi looked down at Jonah. That sounds like something he would say. They didn't speak again for a while. And that silence, like so many lately, wasn't empty. At Miss Addie's bakery later that afternoon, the sun dipped lower, dusting the porch in gold. Naomi sat on the steps, a mug of cinnamon tea cradled between her palms. Jonah played in the small front yard, with a few fallen leaves, giggling as the wind chased them down the walkway. Inside, Addie boxed pies for late Thanksgiving pickups. She glanced out every so often, eyes soft, heart full. You know, she said, finally stepping outside and sitting beside Naomi, when I opened this place 40 years ago, I prayed for two things: that it would smell like love, and that it'd be useful to someone trying to hold on. Naomi turned to her eyebrows lifting. I think you got both. Addie smiled. Today for sure. From across the street, the local church bells chimed once, a signal not of time but of change. A page turned. A group of women approached the porch, tentative but earnest mothers Naomi had seen at the school, women who once whispered about her in checkout lines. They carried foil-wrapped trays, holiday casseroles, paper plates. We figured, one of them said, shifting her weight, you probably hadn't had time to cook. And we just wanted to say, you helped a lot of our kids. Naomi blinked. Not from surprise, but from something deeper. Acceptance. It took her a few seconds to find her voice. Thank you. That means more than you know. Another woman added, we weren't fair before. We just didn't see the whole picture. Naomi stood and met their eyes, not with bitterness, but quiet grace. It's okay. Most people don't look close enough. Caleb remained across the street, arms folded, watching. He didn't step forward, didn't interrupt, because this moment, this soft rise from the ashes, was hers. Back on the porch, Addie handed Naomi a small cloth-wrapped package. Not the pie from earlier, but something heavier. Naomi unfolded the cloth slowly. Inside was a worn, carefully repaired backpack, Jonah's the strap stitched back together with navy blue thread. And nestled inside, next to a rolled-up sweater, was a photo, one she hadn't seen in years. It was her and Jonah taken when he was just a baby, both asleep on a park bench. She remembered that day. It was the first time she let herself rest in public, without fear. Someone must have captured it without her knowing. "I found it in a box of lost things at the school," Addie said quietly. "Thought it belonged with someone who's finally been found." Naomi didn't speak. She just pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. Behind her, Jonah let out a loud laugh as a gust of wind blew a leaf into his face. It was full and round and unburdened. Naomi turned to Caleb, who was still across the street. She didn't wave him over. She didn't have to. He took a step forward on his own. The Ellis room was empty now. The paper sun Jonah had drawn earlier still hung on the wall, slightly tilted its crayon rays, catching the last of the afternoon light. Naomi stood in the center of the room, arms crossed over her chest, not guarded, just still. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. Caleb stopped just a few feet away. He waited. "I didn't think you'd come back inside," Naomi said quietly. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted. The room held their words like breath, gentle, hesitant, suspended. Naomi looked over her shoulder. "Do you ever feel like everything you thought was broken just needed a different kind of glue?" He smiled faintly. "If that glue's name is Naomi Ellis, then yes." Her lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Jonah entered a few seconds later, barefoot on the smooth floor, dragging a blanket behind him. His eyes were half-lidded, his mouth turned up in that dreamy haze between wakefulness and sleep. He walked past Caleb without hesitation and crawled up into Naomi's lap on the small couch tucked into the corner. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just wrapped her arms around him, resting her cheek on top of his head. Caleb remained where he was, unsure. Then Naomi reached out, not with grand gestures, not with declarations, but with the smallest, strongest signal. She patted the cushion beside her. He sat. No words passed between them. They didn't need to. In the silence there was more said than 1,000 apologies. Naomi looked down at Jonah's peaceful face, then turned to Caleb. "You're lucky he loves you," she murmured. "That boy doesn't hand out second chances easily." "I don't think either of you do," Caleb said. They sat in the hush of that room, the room that once held Jonah's silence, Naomi's tears, Caleb's guilt, and now only warmth. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. He didn't hand it to her. He set it gently on the table near her, letting it be her choice. Inside was a simple note scrawled in a child's hand. "You're my voice. Love, Jonah." Naomi didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she placed her hand over Caleb's, firm, certain. They stayed there for a long time. Later that evening, snow began to fall light at first, then thicker, dusting the sidewalks and rooftops of Ashton Falls. Naomi stood just inside the bakery doorway, Jonah wrapped in her coat, his arms around her neck. Caleb waited beside her, coat open, snow in his hair, still uncertain if he should speak. Naomi didn't let him wonder. She turned, looked at both of them, at Jonah, at Caleb, at the story only they had written, and whispered, "Let's go home, all three of us." And for the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like hiding. It felt like arrival. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest truths. In a small town where whispers once wounded a boy, spoke his first word, and a woman who had been overlooked became someone others looked up to. This story isn't about grand gestures. It's about the quiet strength of seeing, of staying, of loving when no one's watching. Kindness, when given freely, always finds its way home. Like a light left glowing in a window, unseen acts of compassion can guide us through the darkest corners of our lives. If this story reminded you of someone who's loved you quietly, maybe today is the day to say thank you or simply pass it on.